having their convictions quashed, having their whole life order quashed, escaping, dying, or being released on compassionate grounds. Those are the only ways out of prison for the murderous savages that you're about to meet. Enjoy. Eerily enough, before jointly murdering a lady called Quen Ngok Nguyen in August 2017, Stephen Unwin and William McFall had each murdered a pensioner and done time for that. They got Miss Nguyen to come to a property under false pretences, and then Unwin raped her, and then afterwards he drove her to a remote location and set her on fire. He then drove to a cash machine and withdrew money from her bank account while the lady burned. The two men got their whole life order in 2018. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the video so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. Ian Birley's first murder was that of 69-year-old Maurice Hoyle, and for that murder he did 18 years. And then in July 2015, when he was 43, together with his girlfriend, a 39-year-old called Helen Nichols, he followed a 65-year-old man called John Gogarty to his home in Roomwell, which is near Barnsley in South Yorkshire, before demanding his PIN and then stabbing him 69 times. The girlfriend, Helen Nichols, got 20 years for the murder, while Birley got whole life. That happened in 2015. Leroy Campbell embarked on his career as a violent criminal with the offence of rape. He did 17 years for the rape of a woman. After that, when he got out, he then raped as well as murdered a nurse called Lisa Skidmore by strangling her with a ligature. This was in Bilston. He also then tried to murder the woman's mother by strangling her with a vacuum cord. Then he tried to cover his tracks by setting fire to Lisa's room and leaving items with other people's DNA on them. The man had only been released 4 months earlier after the 17 years that he did for rape. He got his well-deserved whole life order in 2017. Thomas McDowell presents another case of someone getting a whole life prison sentence for a single murder. McDowell murdered and dismembered a trainee rabbi by the name of Andreas Hint, who was German. After murdering him, McDowell dumped the man's head, limbs and torso in bin bags in Camden, North London. McDowell, who had suffered abuse as a child and had grown up hating homosexuals, pled guilty to manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. That didn't wash with the jury, however, and he went down for murder and got his whole life prison order. Apparently, the reason why John Childs became a contract killer was because he had a business that was failing, and the only way to save it was to inject it with a substantial sum of money. He murdered 6 people. He was paid to do so, and he did those murders between 1974 and 1978. Childs murdered Terence Eve in 1974, Robert Brown in 1975, George Brett and his 10-year-old son Terry Brett later on in 1975, Fred Sherwood in 1978, and Ronald Andrews later on in 1978. The man was jailed in December 1979, with the murders being committed by shooting and stabbing. It was the arrest on suspicion of one violent crime against a boy that led evil paedophile Victor Miller from Wolverhampton, West Midlands, born in 1956, to confess to another, a murder to be exact. The special school that Miller attended in the 60s, Bodenham Manors School, a centre for boys with severe emotional disturbances, was near the Malvern Hills, an area of countryside spread between Worcestershire and Herefordshire. Of the 29 sexual attacks on boys and young men that Miller is thought to have committed over a 15-year period, the one that he committed on a 16-year-old boy in a park down in Brighton is what led to the term of imprisonment that the SHX offender served from 1979 to 1983. After lying low and abstaining from offending for the next 5 years, in January 1988, the predator had his attempt to kidnap a newspaper boy in Hagley thwarted when his would-be victim managed to run away and hide. A few days later, likewise, the perpetrator drove over to the village of Wellington in Herefordshire, this being familiar territory to the antagonist, remember, and made an unsuccessful attempt to snatch 18-year-old Richard Holden as he cycled home down a dark country lane. A strong 6-foot slaughterman, Richard gave his stocky, knife-wielding assailant a powerful kick in the groin before legging it. On the 17th of January 1988, less than 2 days after the perpetrator's attempted kidnap of Richard Holden, 14-year-old Stuart Goff from Hagley, Worcestershire, went on the first of his 2 early morning rounds of newspaper deliveries, which included a total of 14 houses within a few hundred yards of the newsagent's shop. The police were called sometime later that morning when Stuart failed to return to collect the papers for his second round. After an intense 2-week search, which involved more than 170 police officers, 600 public volunteers, an underwater search unit and police helicopters, Stuart's body was found in remote woodland on the southern edge of the Malvern Hills, which was all of 50 miles away from Hagley, but no less familiar territory to the person behind Stuart's murder. Miller had snatched Stuart moments after the boy delivered the last paper from his first round. After essaying and then partially strangling his victim, Miller bludgeoned him to death with a rock. Miller's disclosure to police of the location of his victim's body came after he spent several days in police custody, his arrest having come before the end of January, the perpetrator having been tracked down after Richard Holden gave police a description of the man's car when he reported the pervert's attempted attack on him. Miller's confession of Stuart's murder was triggered by the evidence that was mounting against him in relation to Stuart's disappearance. At his trial at Birmingham Crown Court in November 1988, Victor Miller pleaded guilty to murder and to various other abduction and assault charges. Having long since completed his initial 30-year minimum term, the perpetrator has never once applied for parole, having instead asked never to be released. His obvious remorse, which he once expressed in a direct address to Stuart Goff's family, does count in my opinion. As long as he does stay in prison forever, then to my mind, justice will have been served as far as possible. Anthony Ayres, another man who killed 2 women several years apart, with a prison sentence for the first murder coming in between. So his first murder is the one that he committed in 1994, and the woman that he murdered was none other than his girlfriend. After he got out, which he did in May 2012, he kept a low profile for 3 years, and then on the 19th of November 2015, for whatever reason, he murdered 36-year-old mother of 1, Kelly Pierce, at a friend's flat in Canvey in Essex. He stabbed Kelly 40 times and then beat her to death. He got his whole life order in 2016. Phillip Heggarty murdered his friend Derek Bennett in a hammer attack in 2003. The man later set fire to a Renault Laguna after placing his victim's body in it. The man's body was so severely burnt that it had to be identified by dental records. Heggarty got his whole life order in 2004. The case of Mark Martin from 2005 feels to me like something of a premonition of the atrocities of Valdo Calocane, and you should look that guy up if you're not familiar with his horrendous acts. In 2005, Mark Martin killed 3 homeless women in Nottingham, and he killed them between December 2004 and January 2005. He said that his motive for the murders was to become, quote, Nottingham's first serial killer, unquote. He had 2 accomplices and they were also convicted, but whereas Martin got a whole life prison order, his accomplices received prison terms of 14 and 25 years respectively. Ryan Matthews committed 2 murders and got life for those murders in 1983. On getting out, he went and murdered a healthcare assistant called Sharon Wall at Wootton Hill Hospital in Gloucester. He did that on the 9th of July 2014. Matthews left Broadmoor Secure Hospital in 1999 under the Mental Health Act, and his mental health had deteriorated throughout stays in various hospitals following his release. Matthews, who used to be known as Stephen Cecil King, got his whole life order in 2015. Born in 1977, in 1993, John McGrady was sent to prison for 5 years for false imprisonment of a young woman that he had abducted at knife point as she got off a bus. In 1998, the man was jailed for 6 years for graping and essaying 2 women that he knew. On the 25th of September 2005, Rochelle Holness, a 15-year-old girl who was a neighbour of McGrady's, disappeared after going out to call her boyfriend from a phone box near her home in Lewisham, South London. It's thought that McGrady abducted Rochelle from the phone box at knife point before taking her back to his home, where he strangled and dismembered her. 3 days after doing that, he confessed to his girlfriend what he'd done and then slashed his wrists in a suicide bid, which failed. He got his whole life order in May 2006. On the night of the 21st of June 1971, a steelworker from Cardiff in his mid-20s by the name of Malcolm Green slashed the throat of a 41-year-old woman with a broken bottle. The woman's name was Glenys Johnson, and she happened to be a sex worker that the perpetrator, who murdered this stranger on wasteland near the local docks, had come across. As well as causing a 5-inch wound to Glenys's neck, which nearly decapitated the woman, Green cut several other parts of his victim's body as well, the body subsequently being found half naked and lying face down under a car in a nearby street. In police custody, the perpetrator's confession, which came as soon as the man sat down to be interviewed, but which the man later retracted, said, quote, "I don't know how I done it. All I had was a comb and a shilling. The next thing I knew, I was walking home smothered in blood. I know I did it," unquote. After doing what he did, Green had gone to his workplace, British Steel Corporation's East Moors work, which was nearby, to shower, change, wash his blood-stained clothes, and make a taunting phone call to the police in which he said, quote, "Have you found the body yet? There will be 4 more. This is the Ripper," unquote. That very phone call, though, was then traced to Green's workplace, and the murder itself was then traced to Green, which had to have made the man feel like a total fool. After arresting the perpetrator, police learned that he had told his wife, Marilyn, a few months earlier that he wondered what killing someone would be like. Following that, in their subsequent search of the man's home, police found a dummy made out of a rolled-up carpet, dressed in a shirt and coat, with a knife embedded in its chest and with a red substance staining the area of the stab point. In November 1971, at what was then Cardiff Assize Court, for Glenys's murder, Green got life with a minimum of 25 years. On the 22nd of March 1990, a motorist found in the 2 holdalls that she had spotted sitting by the A467 near Rogerston in Newport, South Wales, 2 upper arms, 2 legs and a torso. All the body parts were individually wrapped in plastic and sealed with sellotape. 4 days later, a young farmer who came from St Bride's Wedlock, some 15 miles away from Newport, found, wrapped in a plastic bag, a severed and bludgeoned head. Nearby, meanwhile, was a white plastic bag containing 2 amputated hands, with the 3rd finger on the left hand completely crushed. These body parts had come from a 24-year-old New Zealander by the name of Clive Tully, who was last seen alive on the 19th of March in Bristol, southwest England. On that day, Clive, who was broke at this point, had asked a friend of his to put him up for the night. Having agreed to do so and then dropped the man off at his home, Malcolm Green, who'd come out of prison 5 months before, later bludgeoned Clive, his friend, with a hammer and then sawed his body into pieces before bagging it and then scattering it in the bags along rural roads down in South Wales. It's hard to see where, between having been born in 1946, ending up as one of 12, losing one of his brothers to a horrific train accident in 1965, getting married at 21 and working as a crane driver at a steelworks, Green developed his evident bloodlust. Before working as a crane driver, he had worked at a slaughterhouse, as do many other people who don't go on to kill. At the end of his 1991 trial for what was dubbed the body in the bag murder, Green got another 25-year sentence. As at the time of this recording, however, the perpetrator was still locked up because Kenneth Baker, the Home Secretary at the time of the man's sentencing, promptly upgraded the perpetrator's sentence to a whole life term. And I, for one, am fucking glad. It almost feels as if there was literally no crime that Hakeem Kigundu didn't commit. He was an illegal immigrant. He was given an eviction notice due to his persistent antisocial behaviour, and that notice triggered him to set fire to the block of flats where he lived, which was in Reading in Berkshire. The fire claimed 2 lives, that of Richard Burgess and that of Neil Morris. It also seriously injured 2 others. The man got a whole life order in 2022. Billy White. He murdered his girlfriend, Lucy Ayres, in 2015, and then he got sentenced to 15 years as the minimum term of his life sentence. But then when he was in prison, like others before him, he murdered a fellow prisoner, someone called Brett Rogers. And the man himself was a convicted murderer. But as I say, murderers murdering other murderers, it's still murder, and it doesn't make any of them a hero. This was, again, at HMP Long Lartin, which is in Worcestershire. He got a whole life order in 2017. Peter Moore was born in 1946 and he used to manage cinemas in North Wales. That was when he wasn't committing any of the 4 murders for which he is now rotting in prison under a whole life prison order. Before he took to murder, the man committed no fewer than 39 sex attacks on men in North Wales and in Merseyside over a 20-year period. He committed his 4 murders between September and December 1995. He stabbed his victims and then mutilated them. At trial, he told the jury that the crimes were committed by a fictitious homosexual lover that he nicknamed Jason after the killer in the Friday the 13th horror films. The jury, of course, found him guilty on all 4 counts of murder. In March 2011, Moore challenged his whole life prison sentence in the European Court of Human Rights, and he aimed, in fact, to have the whole life order outlawed throughout Europe. However, he failed. Born in 1950, in 1975, Michael Smith met a 19-year-old woman by the name of Sheila Deakin, and the two became a couple. However, the relationship was fraught in some way from the very off, and in an argument over a previous boyfriend of Sheila's, Smith strangled his girlfriend to death. Smith did 30 years for that murder. He learned nothing from that punishment though, since in August 2006 he battered his mate Peter Summers to death with a champagne bottle before stealing 8,000 quid from the man's home, this having been his reason for what he did. With that second murder, in May 2007, Smith got forever, a whole life prison sentence of course. Born in 1971, in 1989, Desmond Lee murdered his landlady, Shirley Carr, by strangling her with his bare hands. His reason for killing her was that she had taunted him over the breakup of his first gay relationship. He pled not guilty to murder but was convicted anyway, and he did 14 years, and he got out in 2004. Now, after getting out, he got a new boyfriend, a man called Christopher Pratt, who was actually a married father of 2. And then on one occasion, the 15th of August 2009 to be exact, over at Mr. Pratt's home in Sackville Street, Lee killed his lover by breaking his voice box and by breaking a bone in his neck. The body of Mr. Pratt was still in the flat when Lee stole the man's credit card and debit cards, and with those cards he paid off a phone bill, bought alcohol for a party with his neighbours, ordered more than £200 worth of food from Asda, and attempted to buy £1,181 worth of goods from Argos. In court, this time he admitted to killing Mr. Pratt, but he claimed it was a freak sex accident. In April 2010, he got his whole life order. George Johnson is a double murderer. He did 20 years of a life sentence for a murder that he committed in the course of a burglary that came in 1986. Then when he got out in 2011, he murdered 89-year-old Florence Habish in February in order to get money to fund his drug addiction. It was a fully premeditated murder as well. He got his whole life order in 2011. Alan Maidment has got convictions for robberies and for possessing a knife and for 2 murders. He got his first murder conviction and he served his time and then he got out. But then 9 months later in 2017, he murdered again. It was a man that he believed had assaulted his girlfriend. He murdered that man by stabbing him 32 times. He got his whole life order in 2017. Stephen McColl is a former gangster who got his whole life order in 2006 for 2 murders. His first victim was a man called Michael Doran, who was a member of his gang, and the reason he killed him was that he suspected him of being an informer for Greater Manchester Police. And yet, crazily enough and ironically enough, after he killed Michael Doran, he himself became an informer for Greater Manchester Police. The man's second victim was a man called Philip Noakes, whose crime against McColl was to have publicly humiliated him. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.